Hey everybody, this is Luke Menkes, the host of the I Love Kelowna podcast. Now, if you've been listening until now, we're putting this out as episode 77, and I don't think I've done an introduction to the show until now. What I've tried to do more recently is kind of summarize what we're going to talk about when the guest comes on and say, I want to talk to you about this and this and this, and that gives a little bit of an introduction so that if you're scrolling through the episodes, you can listen to the first 10 or 15 seconds and decide if you want to listen to it. I don't expect every single listener to listen to every episode, although there are several of you out there, and I want to thank you very much for that. But the reason I don't do long intros is because of the podcast that I love. That is one of my biggest frustrations. People have way too long of an intro, and it gets repetitive, and it's the same every single time. And I just don't want to listen to 5-6 minutes of filler before I get to the content. So that's why generally I don't do introductions, but I'm doing one today because this episode is unique. This was originally recorded on August 28th, 2018. A woman named Karen Bowen, who runs a consulting business called Manager Know-How, was a guest on the show back in August. Let me see here. She was episode 38, and we did the interview August 17th, and we published the episode November 4th. 2 weeks after that, she came and interviewed me, which was something different. But a few people have asked me, among guests have asked me, for details about my story, because most of the episodes I'm asking the questions. You'll hear me throw in tidbits of my own personal experience, but generally the focus is on the guest. So there is a podcaster in the United States named James Altucher. Now, I love this guy. He's a quirky dude. He's got a really unique way of thinking. And I ran into James because when I was going through my situation, my financial difficulties and relationship difficulties, I was looking for inspirational speakers. And I was particularly interested in people who went from like rags to riches, people who overcame great adversity to accomplish great things and have financial success, but also relationship and family success. I looked to these people for inspiration because I didn't have a ton of great role models growing up. So I kind of needed that. But part of the problem, an obstacle for me mentally, was that I had actually made money and I survived the hurricane in 2004 in the Cayman Islands, and I was able to rebuild the building. But in 2012, when I got into big financial difficulties, it was a real self-esteem thing for me because I thought, I'm looking at people who have come from nothing and made it, but I can't find any examples of people who made it and then lost everything, like went below where they started. I felt like, a total idiot. I thought there's probably no examples of someone like that. Now, I knew there were examples out there, but I just couldn't find them. All the stories that I looked at, like even Steve Jobs was, middle class, lower middle class growing up, and he got fired from his company. And it was devastating, but he still had, many millions of dollars in the bank, and he was able to help fund the company Pixar, and eventually come back to Apple. We all know the story. So I really couldn't relate to any of these stories on a complete level. James Altucher sold his software business in the late 1990s for $15 million US, paid off all his debts, and he had $15 million in the bank, and he actually lost everything, made a series of bad investments, and he had his beautiful downtown Manhattan condo foreclosed upon, and he lost everything. He was basically homeless. He had 2 small children at the time, which I did as well. So he was able to make it back. And he is someone that, has been an inspiration for me. So one of the unique things about James' podcast is every 20 to 25 episodes, someone will interview him. So a previous guest will come on and ask him some questions. And a lot of people have asked for this. 2 or 3 people so far have volunteered to interview me. The first one was Karen Humes. So you're going to hear her interview with me. And that's what I plan to do. Every 20, 25 episodes is going to be either a monologue from me or someone coming on to interview me. If you'd like to do that, just shoot me an email and we could talk about it. For me, it was a lot of fun. Now, if you're wondering why this was recorded in August 2018 and I'm releasing it near the end of April 2019, it was a bit of a difficult conversation for me. So we're going through a lot of my past and things I went through, and I would start to edit the episode and I kind of said, and I put it off to the side and procrastinate. But today, I'm finally going to release it to you. So this is episode 77, my interview with Karen Humes. Hope you enjoy it, and talk to you later. A few people have requested it and are curious about my story. So Karen has volunteered to interview me. So Karen, thank you for coming in today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to turn the tables on you, Luke. I'm really excited. And for everybody listening, when Luke interviewed me a while ago, we ended up just mutually sharing some of the stories. And I found all of his story very interesting. And I was one that said, has anybody ever interviewed you? And then, of course, Luke said, well, I've had a couple of requests. And I was really excited when I said, well, I would actually love to do that. I think your story's fascinating and engaging. And I think a lot of people would love to know a little bit more about you. So do you want to kind of start where this all started and tell us a little bit about your story?
Wow, where do I start? So I've lived in Kelowna for 7 years, since 2011. It was September 2011 when I moved here. I vacationed here first time in 2004 with my ex-girlfriend. We were living in the Cayman Islands at the time. And she was from Kelowna. Originally from Edmonton, but she was from Kelowna. And we decided we were going to move in together in 2004 in the Cayman Islands. So we had to come to Kelowna so she could pack up her stuff. And we put her stuff in the storage on the west side. And I recall there was still the drawbridge at that time. The new bridge was under construction, and West Kelowna was kind of like in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, why are you storing your stuff there? And she said, it's the only place with available space. So there's a huge storage location just across the bridge. And at that time, there was nothing around it, as I recall. So I was taking boxes for her while she was packing. That was my first memory of Kelowna. And we flew into Vancouver, drove up here. I remember it was so beautiful. So the next thing that happened was Hurricane Ivan in 2004 devastated the Cayman Islands, destroyed our property. And Valencia, my ex, was 4 months pregnant with my daughter. Olivia is now 13 and a half. The hurricane hit. Most of the island had no electricity for 6 months. It was incredibly humid and hot, no air conditioning. Yeah. She didn't have health insurance in the Cayman Islands, so it was going to cost us $15,000 to have Olivia there. But she still had BC health insurance. So we temporarily moved back to Vancouver while I was rebuilding the building. And my daughter was born in Vancouver. my brother passed away also in 2004. So 2004 was a huge year for me.
That's a big year.
Yeah. Met Valencia. We became pregnant. Hurricane Ivan destroyed my property. And my brother was 29 years old, died of a drug overdose.
Wow.
He was in Toronto living at my mom's. And she sent me a fax, if you can believe it.
A fax.
She was just really nervous at the telephone. So I set up my email to receive faxes, and where I could send an email and I would go to her fax machine. She would just refuse to learn email or anything like that. So she sent me a fax, and we were rebuilding. We would go to a local hotel where they had electricity and Wi-Fi. And so I opened my email, and it was like November 3rd, 2 months after the hurricane. Valencia was about 6 months pregnant at this time, and I get this fax that she found him in bed. He was a millionaire and became addicted to heroin. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
So in the last day, he stole my mom's laptop, pawned it off, bought some drugs, and she saw him in bed, and she said, Mark, and he kind of moved, and she thought, well, he's going to sleep it off. It's fine. I'll check in the morning. Morning, she came down. He was in the exact same position and was stiff. So horrible. So
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. I don't usually talk about it, but it's connected to Kelowna and Vancouver. So after that happened, my mom was devastated. So she sold her house in Toronto, moved to Vancouver, and Valencia and I decided we're going to go to Vancouver. Baby would be born in Vancouver. We'd spend some time with my mom. And we didn't really have a comfortable place to live in the Cayman Islands because everything was just ripped apart. We actually moved into Mark, my brother's townhouse. He had a tenant in there, and they were British bankers, very wealthy people. The ground floor of everything was demolished, like water. The ocean came across the island.
Wow.
So this building, this townhouse, the roof was fine. The walls were intact, but the ground floor was flooded. So everybody had to pull out their appliances and about 4 to 6 feet of drywall to prevent rot.
Right.
And this couple, they called me and they said, this is unacceptable. We want our security deposit back. But for us, our building was demolished. Like the roof was off and there were steel beams in our bed and everything. And we thought, this is great. We got a place to live. But we had a small little AC unit on a generator, which had to be filled up every 3 hours. And we just decided it's going to be easier for Valencia to be in Vancouver with air conditioning. And my mom was there and helped take care of her. So I was flying back and forth.
Wow. Took
about a year to rebuild the property, and we broke up a few months after the property was rebuilt. So Olivia lived in the Cayman Islands for about 4 months. Then they moved to Edmonton. And in the interim, I got a job in the radio in early 2005. And this is kind of a funny story. So I was always super stage fright. Well, not always. When I was a little kid, I used to debate with my parents. 3, 4 years old, right? And they said, I had thick little Coke bottle glasses, and they said, you're going to be a lawyer when you grow up because you question everything, you argue, I wouldn't, they would say, you have to eat this food. And I would say, why? Explain it to me. I want details, even at 4 years old, and I would try to negotiate and stuff. Something happened when when I was 12 or 13, my parents divorced and they turned a little bit mean. They kind of went from tell us a story to nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Right? So I've always kind of had this split personality where I've got a lot to say, a lot to talk about, but I've got this fear of speaking. So I was in my 30s in the Cayman Islands, and my 2 best friends were part of a brand new radio station, and they had the morning show. They fired their third person, the co-host, after a week because of bad attitude or something. I don't know. They fired her. So they said on the radio, they said, any of our friends that want to come in and sit in with us, why don't you sit in with us? So I thought, I don't know, something impelled me, and I went. And I was so nervous, like my voice was cracking, I was terrified. But we were best friends, drinking buddies, and we actually were allowed to like drink on set. So here we were at 7 a.m, doing tequila shots, and our sense of humor just jived because we were best friends. And they gave me a code name because they thought it'd be a neat little trick if we don't say who you are. So my stage name was Hardcore. And she said, my boss, Cece, her name is Serlina, but her radio name was Cece. And she said, because, Luke, everything you do it with passion. So we're going to call you the Hardcore. And it's a great, catchy name. Easy to remember, right? So after a week, I said, I want to have my own radio show. And they said, that's impossible. You don't have any experience. You don't have any training. There's no way. And I said, no, I want...
4-year-old in you, really.
I'm like, I want my own show. And they're like, look, maybe one day, but you have no training. You don't know how to work the console. Like, you don't know anything. You can hang out with us, but... So 4 months later, boss calls me into his office, and he says, Luke, are you practicing in the car? I said, yeah. He says, are you practicing when you're in the shower? And I said, yeah. He says, it shows. He said... You're the most improved voice on the station. Billy, who had the lunchtime show, has to move back to Vancouver for family reasons. Do you want to take his lunchtime slot? And I was like, yes. So I got to lunchtime. It was midday, whatever, with Hardcore. And I said, I love the house and the top 40 music that we're playing, but I really want some classic rock because that's what I grew up with, right? I should tell you that story about how I moved to the Cayman Islands. But he's like, nobody on this island wants to listen to classic rock. And I said, if I can find a sponsor, can I do it? And he said, sure. So I went to one of my favorite bars. Billy Bones was a swim-up pool bar, open to the public. It was in a hotel, but... we would all go there on Sundays for vodka and tomato juice and Caesars. Everybody with that hangover would go there. It's a huge drinking culture on that island. So I went to the owner because I was a regular barfly at this bar, and I said, I've got this concept for a show. Do you want to do it? He's like, yeah. He's like, we're playing classic rock off the satellite all the time. So now it was the Billy Bones Sunday afternoon classic rock show with Hardcore.
Nice.
And so my voice was coming through the speakers instead of just somebody from the States off the satellite. And he paid, I think, $400 a month for that, which my salary was only $15 an hour. So my boss made some money. I got paid.
Yeah.
And I got free drinks when I went there. And it was awesome. So it was so much fun. So when we broke up, she was back in Edmonton where she grew up. So I was flying between Cayman and Edmonton. And the radio station said, you can't have your regular show anymore because it's inconsistent, but you can come as a guest anytime you're on the island.
Right.
And I was in Edmonton with my daughter, who was 12 months old. She couldn't even speak English, And I didn't know anybody in Edmonton. It was very lonely and very... depressing. So in 2006, I learned about podcasting, and I started a podcast. And I did 99 episodes. I gave it up to run a bar and restaurant business. And I shouldn't have done it, because at the peak, I was getting 3,000 unique downloads an episode all over the world. And on Google, I could see... all the countries like where people were downloading it, and I saw Iraq and Afghanistan, and I thought, I don't think there are people of that culture listening to this show. Yeah. I couldn't figure it out. I started to get emails from listeners. It was actually Canadian and American soldiers that were stationed there, and they were listening to me.
Right.
So to me, 3,000 is kind of a magic number. It's like that tipping point. Like some of the biggest podcasts get over 1 million downloads, you know. But there were dozens, if not hundreds of people in like dozens of countries.
Yeah.
All across the planet. So it's just starting to mushroom, and I thought running this bar is more important. So I decided to do that instead.
So it's so interesting listening to your story. What comes up for me as you speak is this underlying foundation of resilience and courage and bravery to just, you know, be passionate about what you do, try new things, and be willing to put yourself out there. So what do you think is the key to resilience?
For me, it was... So I like to say I made and lost $1 million twice. So with the building, I had about $1 million in equity in that building when it was destroyed by the hurricane, and I had insurance coverage, but I didn't have rental interruption insurance. I didn't know anything about insurance. I just paid it.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the things I always tell people, like, read your insurance policy. If you have insomnia, you should read it. If you care about your money, you should read it. It's so dry and boring. But I would have saved myself hundreds of thousands of dollars if I learned before the hurricane what an insurance policy is, what it covers, what it doesn't. All these concepts that aren't super difficult to understand, but you need to know. That, I was able to recover from that. I had no savings. You know, I had maybe $200 in my pocket. My car was destroyed, and insurance did not cover the car because they said you didn't have flood insurance. And I said, why would I have flood insurance? They said, you probably wouldn't. The island hasn't flooded since the last direct hit, which was 72 years prior. There probably wasn't even an insurance company back then. Like, it was, you know, a tiny fisherman's island before the offshore banking and everything. So I recovered from that. But in 2012, I had sold the building in Cayman in 2008, and in 2009, I bought a bar and restaurant in Nelson. 2010, I bought the building that the restaurant was in, but I didn't do an inspection on the building. By 2012, I had lost everything. I was into debt. 2012 was worse for me emotionally, because after the hurricane, there was a sense of hope. I got a little bit of money. I got a cleanup crew. You had good days, you had bad days, but over time you could see this building getting rebuilt, and it was exciting. And I had some huge obstacles, like I was able to refinance, and that was super exciting. But it took time. The general contractor was fraudulent, so we had to fire him. I lost a couple of $100,000 there, but I learned general contracting. So even with setbacks, over time things were improving, and I was really gaining my confidence back, you know. But in 2012, this building, it was getting worse. So we'd have a pipe burst in the basement, and the plumbing company would say, we need a retainer from you, because last time you took 90 days to pay us the bill.
Right.
So we're not going to do anything. So I had to shut the water off to the entire building, and then I got tenants upstairs, and they can't shower. You know what I mean? So it was getting worse over time instead of getting better over time. And I just felt like such a loser. You know, like I thought, how could I get myself into this situation, right? So for me, resilience was my daughter, because her mom has always worked as a waitress, high-end restaurants. She was working at Ferdinand's on the beach in Cayman Islands at the Westin Hotel. She's always been like, you know, in that profession, she's the best, right? But it means she works nights. So since Olivia was like a year and a half, she stayed with me 6 nights a week. So I raised her, you know what I mean? I had to get her to sleep. I had to learn how to cook. I had to learn how to take care of a little kid, you know? And I just couldn't, you know, the days I wanted to stay in bed and not do anything and just be depressed, I couldn't do it because she needed to be fed, right? We needed to pay rent somehow. right? So she was what kept me going through those years, for sure.
Yeah, it's when you talk about depression and anxiety, and it's so prevalent in our society, and I know it fills me with joy to hear that people can actually be honest about it, and we're talking about it more, and it's okay to feel these things because we all do. And I think hope is one of the key pieces, even if it's just that glimmer. It's that hope of that things can be, I'm not going to say better because that implies judgment, but the hope that things will be different.
Yeah.
Or lead you more towards what you want. And I hear that in what you're saying. And there's, what would you offer for people that are struggling out there today and maybe listening to this and thinking, well, I don't have a daughter, so why should I get out of bed?
Well, one thing I learned was, she gave me hope, right? She gave me motivation. But I honestly, there were many, many times where I didn't see a way out. Like, I didn't know how I could possibly get out of that situation. Like, I was doing deliveries, as part of my financial recovery. I thought, what do I have, right? I've got limited formal education. Like, I dropped out of high school, and then I went to university as a mature student. And I dropped out of university 2 years later, got my real estate license in the 1990s in Toronto. So I kind of was in a situation where I would quit things, just as soon as I started to get good. And in this case, like, I was in debt, behind on car payments, like they were threatening to repossess the car. And I didn't know how I was going to get to tomorrow. Like, many days I thought, just got to get enough food for today. Just got to get $5 of gas so I can get to work, right? Like, it was that bad.
Wow.
So I would say that if I can get out of a situation like that, anybody can. Like, I just didn't see how I could do it, right? And Olivia was a huge motivator for me. So I think you got to find something that motivates you. But there is a way out. That is for sure. And I think once I realized there's a way out, that gave me hope, aside from Olivia. Yeah. There came a point where I was doing it for myself, for my own pride. Not just trying to keep a child alive, but I started to feel better about myself. And I realized there is a way out. You just make incremental improvements every single day. One of the things I did was I took a close look at the content I was consuming. We're bombarded with information and videos and fun stuff and jokes, and I realized, just like food, I crave McDonald's, tastes great, and almost always 30 minutes later I'm like, why the hell did I do that, right? And I think the content we consume is the same. Music, videos, things that we listen to, it's the same kind of thing. Like, it might be funny and make us laugh, but it's kind of like mental junk food. So it's like, oh, that's funny, and it's addictive, and it feels good for a moment, but you don't really feel motivated or energized afterwards. It's just garbage, right? It's just totally garbage. And I was kind of in a desperate spot. So it's like, if you're hungry, you got to think, what is the healthiest thing I can eat? Right? You're scouring your cupboards, and so for me, the mental food, because I've always been, since a little child, a huge consumer of information. Through all of this, I've always read 200 pages a day, and it can be just random crap, right? Sports scores, and, So I really had to think, like, what am I consuming? So I was delivering pizza, and I was delivering newspapers at 3 a.m, and I thought, I've got a car, and the speakers work, right? So I started to listen to podcasts, I started to listen to audiobooks. So in order to deliver newspapers efficiently, you have to be fast, otherwise you'll actually make less than minimum wage, right? So I had to take like 6-7 newspapers under my arm and then run, and it was great. It was getting me in shape. And I thought, instead of pausing the audiobook and then getting back in my car and rewinding, I rolled down all my 4 windows, and I had the heat cranked in the winter, and I had the volume up full, right? And I swear, like, I was delivering newspapers in, like, kind of seniors complexes, because it's usually seniors who are still getting printed, right? And I swear there must have been some couples, like, waking up and saying, you know, honey, I don't know if I'm dreaming, but I think Tony Robbins is in the parking lot, you know? But I found it started to motivate me, and I started to get ideas, you know? And there's a guy named Hal Elrod that I recommend. He's a guy that went through 2 financial collapses himself. One was he was a top salesman for Cutco knives, early 20s. He got into a car accident with a drunk driver. He was clinically dead for 9 minutes. And he said that was very painful. Like, he broke like 32 bones, and he was in a coma for a week. But he said that was not as bad as 2009 when he almost went bankrupt because, like I said, with the hurricane, very painful, very difficult, but each day is a little bit better. You have good days and bad days, but over time you're getting better. And when you lose financially, in some ways it's worse because you feel like tonight is going to be worse than this morning because the bill collectors are getting more angry. The bills are piling up, right? It's not getting better. It's getting worse, right? So he went through a similar situation, and he developed this program called the Miracle Morning, and like how you start your day affects the outcome of your day. And our life is an accumulation of days. So that's the basic concept. But what do you do when you first wake up, right? Are you checking emails, or, you know, it's meditation, it's exercise, it's just basic stuff. But he talks about how he changed his life, and he's helped other people to do it. So to me, that was like, I'm here fighting snow and ice at 3:30 in the morning, you know, close to 40 years old, got a 7-year-old at home, roommates at home. So, like, people have said, oh my God, you left your kid alone. I'm like, no, we had roommates. We had a point where we were sharing a bedroom, and we were in a house with 3 adults, 2 children, and about 7 pets. Because that's all we could afford. You know? So I would go deliver newspapers, come back, wake her up for school, get her dressed, make her breakfast, make her lunch, drive her to school, and then go to my other job. Right? And that's what I had to do for a while. But just listening to these people, I thought, I could do this. You know, I could really do this. But one thing, I just want to mention this, like, was a sticking point was I would listen to rags to riches stories, like Oprah Winfrey. She started out very poor. But I thought, I can't fully relate because nobody had $1 million in the bank and blew it all and became almost homeless. Like, sometimes I slept in my car because of deliveries. And I just felt like such a loser. And I thought, there's no one like this, like that had made a bunch of money and just completely, by their own doing, put themselves into a catastrophe. But then I found someone, his name is James Altucher, and he sold his company for $15 million, and he got foreclosed on, and he was almost homeless. Wow. He made a series of bad decisions, and I was like, for the first time, I thought, that is hope for me. That is someone who actually knew how to make money and made a series of bad decisions and lost everything so badly. So I can relate to this, and there's hope for me because I can eventually recover, you know?
Well, and I think as you share the story and people hear this, it's going to inspire hope in others. And, you know, I feel very lucky to have met you and heard your story, and I share some of my own struggles, and I'm, you know, very closely acquainted. Some of my deepest loved ones suffer from some of the same issues and depression and struggling to find that hope. So I drew that from your story as well.
Thank you.
Bring me to the we talk about gradually, suddenlies. We think things happen suddenly, but they don't. They tend to add up or accumulate over time, and then what we see in other people and society is we see the suddenlies. So what were the graduallys and then the suddenlies that landed you in Kelowna?
Okay.
And why did you pick Kelowna, other than you had vacationed here and it was an amazing, beautiful spot, obviously?
It was, yeah. So in 2008, as a news junkie, since I was 11, when CNN launched, I watched CNN. since I was 11. It was 1980 when CNN launched. And I was like, yeah, it's just weird like that. And my dad would talk to me about, Ronald Reagan and how it was such an astonishing victory and nobody thought he could do it. And people said he was crazy and senile. Then by 1984, he won in a landslide and they kind of laid off him a little bit. I think we're going through a similar situation now, but we'll see. We'll see. But I was really into politics and news and stuff like that. And I didn't really realize that there are money interests with an agenda behind that. So it's okay to watch the news, but immersing yourself in it the way I did is not a good idea. Because in 2008, with the American financial crisis, I freaked out. Like, I was literally afraid. So I had this building that was rebuilt. It was beautiful. I had full of tenants. And I called my realtor, John May, who's one of my great mentors. He passed away in 2011. But I said, John, I want you to sell the building. And he said, Luke, you should never panic in real estate. If you actually need to panic, it's too late. So don't panic. And I said, John, I want you to put it up for sale. I want you to sell it. So he sold it. So, and I shouldn't have done that, but I thought, the world's coming to an end. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but, so my ex had moved to Nelson. She said, Edmonton's kind of a crap place to raise a kid. So I want to take her to Nelson. And I said, fine, that's okay. So I got an apartment in Nelson. I was renting. So I sold my condo in Edmonton. I was between Cayman and Nelson. And in 2008, I went and I called the bottled water company and I said, I want 100 bottles of water. And they said, why? I said, I just want to be prepared, I was getting like freeze-dried food packages, like military style stuff that would last a year. Like I thought the power was I thought everything was going to crash permanently. So I sold the building and I always wanted a Swiss bank account. So I opened a bank account in Switzerland, paid off all my debts, bought myself a brand new car in Kelowna. So I took the Greyhound bus from Nelson to Kelowna, bought myself a brand new car here, drove back to Nelson, and I put $1 million American in a Swiss bank account. I was like, I was so proud of myself. Wow. I was so smart. And I had cupboards full of freeze-dried food and bottled water, and I was set. I was ready to go, right? So a year goes by, and I'm bored, So I would take, Olivia was 3.5 at the time, I'd take her for a walk, I'd bring her home for a nap, then we read a book, and then we go for another walk, and I'm like, this is crazy. I'm 39 years old, like, I gotta do something. So I'm sitting at one of my favorite bars in Nelson on the patio, the Royal on Baker, and the owner says to me, Luke, I am so exhausted. I've been doing this for 6 years. Do you know anybody who would like to buy this business? Well, I couldn't sleep. I ended up buying it because I thought I have spent so much time on this side of the bar. How hard could it be to be on the other side of the bar, right? I'm friends with bartenders, bar managers. I would have my regular spots in the Cayman Islands and Kelowna and Edmonton. And all the staff would know me, and I would spend the day there. Like, it's a little embarrassing to admit, but that was my life. And even when I owned real estate, like, you sometimes have to wait for 2 weeks for anything to happen. Yeah. Right? So I'm just sitting at the bar, doing emails, reading stuff off my phone, chatting people up, right? So I decided to buy this bar. Now, it was totally different. So with the radio station, we would host parties at my place. So in my building, my apartment was in the building. I decided to build it. An apartment, and it was a commercial building, so we could bring DJs over with their equipment and no complaints from neighbors. Nice. And we hosted amazing parties. My partner Alexi and I, we called it like a 5-star barbecue. So instead of hot dogs and hamburgers, we'd have steak, we'd have lobster. So the men would have to bring $50 cash and their own booze, or contribute something. And then we would get any of the women that wanted to help, make the salad and help Alexi because he's an amazing chef. And we just had amazing barbecues, but it would be drinking. It would be like all night until people wanted to go home. DJs would be able to come for free. We'd supply the equipment. So all our friends who were DJs, and it was just amazing. So we thought, well, it's going to be the same thing in Nelson. Totally different. You can't drink, right? The liquor inspector, the police, and the fire chief are on your case all the time. And I realized for the first time in my life that if I'm not drinking, I don't like being around people who are drinking because they're obnoxious, mentally impaired, and it's terrible. And so, you know, if you go to a bar and it's a bad vibe and someone's getting drunk, you just get your tab and you leave, right? Well, when you own the place, it's kind of the opposite. So you'd be in bed with your children and the staff will call you and say, you got to come down here, please, or we have an incident. Yeah. So it's the opposite. Like, you have to be there when things are intense. Yeah. And it just became unenjoyable very fast. Liquor inspector was like, you know, Alexei was trying out new concoctions for shots, right? So we're standing at the bar. He creeps up behind us, says, I hope you're not on shift right now because that would be a $10,000 fine. And Olivia, so the office was not licensed, so I could put her in the office. But if she even crossed the floor during opening hours, he like threatened me in front of her. She's 4 years old. And he's like, that could be a $10,000 fine for a minor. And we got a $2,000 fine one time because we had a patio that was separated by a sidewalk. And a female patron wanted to take her drink to the bathroom so she doesn't get drugged, right? And we had a $2,000 fine because the rule is a staff member with a serving at right license has to carry that drink across the sidewalk. Right. And if we weren't doing anything wrong, it was like, you know, in the Cayman Islands.
Technicalities.
Yeah, in the Cayman Islands, big fine for littering. But you're an adult, you want to take your vodka cranberry to go, they'll give it to you to go because you're an adult. Yeah. They'll fine you if you try to throw it on the ground. But, you know, it's like in British Columbia, it's like you cross this little imaginary line, now you're going to get a fine. You know, and it was just...
culture change, for sure.
Total culture shock, you know. And I'm a Canadian. I was born and raised here, but totally different. So we did okay with the bar. It was profitable. But I decided to buy this building and didn't do an inspection. You know, it was like... the landlord was like, well, you just give me a down payment and your monthly payment's going to be the same as the rent you're paying me anyways, but you got to do it really fast because I have a Revenue Canada issue. Right. And if the price is going to go up, I'm going to list it with a realtor, so I'll give you a disclosure statement. And anyways, this building had tons of problems. And then I realized that when you renovate, you open up a big can of worms. So this was a 100-year-old building. As soon as you open up a wall, they want you to bring everything up to code. Right. So part of this was deception, but a lot of it was my fault, you know. And the guy who sold me the building held the mortgage. And he said, don't worry about it. I got behind on the mortgage. He's like, don't worry about it. You'll get caught up. You'll get caught up. And he surprised me and served me with foreclosure. So I countersued, and we went to trial, and the judge said, I can't believe you, Luke, with over 20 years experience in real estate, wouldn't get an inspection. And you only formally complained about the issues once he sued you for foreclosure. There was no complaints in writing. And she threw my case out. So now I had, so it was an order absolute, which means that the debt on the building gets wiped, but you got to hand the keys back. Right. I had to give the keys back. So while this court case was going on, it took about a year, Valencia moved to Kelowna because she was a waitress in Nelson. She said sales were way down. It was a bit of a slowdown in 2011, 2012. And I said, fine, you know, you do what you got to do. And I decided, well, I've got to get some work. There was really no work for me in Nelson. Now I came to Nelson as a millionaire and I was completely broke and homeless, right? So I said, okay, well, move the child to Kelowna. I came to Kelowna. So I have my car, and I got some little business cards printed, and I started a little company called Mr. Dispatcher, and I was delivering pizza, Indian food, you know, medication for seniors, even pets. So Greyhound around that time stopped taking pets. So I put little ads. And I had a boss who had dealt with 6 restaurants, 3 Indian restaurants, and I think Yamas and so on. And she was so worried about displeasing the owners by being short-staffed, she would overstaff us. So most of the time we're sitting there waiting for the call. So I went to Denenzi's Pizza and I said, give me a job. And they said, sure. So and she caught me. Like, I was doing both, right?
Right.
But she said, I drove by your car behind the Indian restaurant. I saw a Denenzi's bag in your car. You know, you're busted, right? But I had to. I mean, I just had to, right?
So you were like the early skip the dishes.
Yes, that's right.
That was your brainstorm.
That was me, yeah. And it's like, what can I do? Well, I have a car. So I didn't have any form. I would apply for jobs, you know. Yeah. And I applied to be a receptionist at real estate companies because I said, well, I've got real estate experience. And one local company said, go get your license and we'll hire you as a realtor day one. Now, I just thought, well, that's pretty amazing. But I didn't realize that many real estate firms, not all of them, but many will, if you've got a license and a pulse, they'll take you.
Right, okay.
Because they're not paying for anything.
Yeah.
Right? So I said, will you front the money for my course? He said, no. I said, because many people don't pass, and if you have to scrape and borrow and whatever you got to do,
you're going to work at it.
You're going to work at it. Right? And that's what happened. I actually borrowed the money for my course. And between calls for the deliveries, I had the textbook on my front seat, and I was studying.
Wow.
Then I was just obsessed. I'm like, I got to get my real estate license. That'll solve all my problems. In late 2012, I wrote the exam. I passed. So January 2013, I started as a realtor. And yeah.
So you're obviously doing this podcast now too.
Yes.
So now you're back in working as a realtor in Kelowna.
Right.
So what was obviously you've always had this interest in news and sharing information and connecting with people. I hear those themes through your story, but what caused you to pick up the microphone again?
Now that's a great question. So I had a vocal condition. I didn't realize it until this period where it was broke. My mother had it. I didn't know it until after the fact. Like she passed away a year to the day after my brother did. But when she was nervous or angry, her voice would crack. And it's actually a medical condition called spasmodic dysphonia or strangled voice. And if you look on YouTube and stuff, they say there is no cure. You can take a highly risky surgery where they actually snip your vocal cords. And it's got a 90% success rate. And so I said, well, what happens with the other 10%? You may be mute for the rest of your life. I'm like, that's crazy.
That's a big risk.
I don't give that much of a shit if my voice cracks, right? Like, that's crazy. So I thought, I've got so much to say, and I would only talk when, I would drink. So in the interest of time and not making the episode too ridiculously long, we had to cut it off there. But in a couple of weeks, we'll put out the conclusion. I hope you enjoyed it. It wasn't easy talking about all those things, but editing it today, late April 2019, wasn't as bad as I thought. So I'm glad I was able to finally get it out there. And if you have any questions or comments, please shoot me an email. My email address is in the show notes. You can click on the link and send me a note anytime. Thanks again for listening. I really appreciate all of you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Luke Menkes is a realtor. He loves what he does. We asked Luke if he had any regrets about moving here in 2011, and he always says, yeah, one regret, and that is he didn't move here sooner. When Luke came here, he didn't know anyone. He didn't know the neighborhoods or anything or anyone besides his daughter, who was 6 years old at the time. So he knows what it's like. Now, he's an expert and has helped well over 100 single people, couples, families, and investors with their real estate needs in the Okanagan. If you're new to our beautiful city, Luke can help you get connected with great lawyers, dentists, carpenters, landscapers, swimming pool installers, you name it. And whether you're new to Kelowna or not, Luke knows real estate. He can help you find a great property, negotiate a good deal, and hold your hand all the way through the process until the day you get your shiny new set of keys. Luke is known as a no-pressure kind of guy. He's had clients where it took even a year or more to get them into a property. He just doesn't believe in rushing things. On the other hand, when you decide it's time to act, he's diligent, and he'll work day and night until the job is done. Give Luke Menkes a call or a text message at any time, 778-215-4273. Again, that's 778-215-4273. 778-215-4273 to chat with Luke about real estate.